At the UPS Store, we know being a small business owner means holiday time is still go time. Still get those orders shipped time. And still re-up on stamps and supplies time. That's why this upcoming holiday, while others close up shop, we'll be open. And happy to help you keep being unstoppable. Come into your local store today. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Be unstoppable.
Lemon, lime, and a drop of cherry make a simple Shirley. But what happens when Tito's handmade vodka reveals this sweet sipper's dirty secret? Stir up a Tito's Dirty Sherlock and crack the case with Tito's at Tito'sVodka.com. 40% alcohol by volume, namely 80 proof, crafted to be savored responsibly.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, they're the most powerful police force in the world. But how did the NYPD get that way? We'll patrol their surprising history in the podcast Empire City, the Untold Origin Story of the NYPD. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Mr. Kevin Flynn. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Rip Current, Strange Arrivals, and More Like Ancient Phalians podcasts, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
Hey, Rebecca.
All right, so Toby, speaking of your new podcast, Rip Current, there's a wonderful thread going on about it on our Facebook group of folks that are listening to it and enjoying it and talking about it. But what is happening on this week's episode of Rip Current?
So I think it's going to be episode 6. So this begins the second part of the podcast, which is really focused on Sarah Jane Moore. And I've been psyched for people to hear about this because it's not very well known. But it starts off with Patty Hearst and Patty Hearst's abduction and how it really threw the country into kind of a tizzy and people didn't really know who had abducted her. Even when they found out it was the Symbionese Liberation Army, it was like, who are these people? And I think the SLA was even a little surprised that they got away with it. So they start issuing demands. And that's part of what this episode is about how do you live up to these demands that this crazy group of radicals is throwing out there.
Yeah. The Patty Hearst story is really weird.
It's nuts. And what's crazy is I didn't intend to spend any time on Patty Hearst when I started doing the podcast, but she's so entwined with the Sarah Jane Moore story that it was impossible to tell it without her. Her experience was very similar to both Sarah Jane Moore and Lynette Fromm's experience in that she sort of lived this very conventional life. And then just suddenly she was kidnapped and she was held in a closet for 6 weeks and indoctrinated into...
Her life wasn't conventional, Toby. She's from one of the richest families in America.
Right, but they were conservative. I mean, socially conservative for the time. So she was going to boarding schools and stuff. She wasn't living in communes and, taking LSD at 12 and stuff like Diane Lake was. So anyway, check it out. If you don't know much about Sarah Jane Moore, and most people don't, it's a crazy, crazy story. And it all begins today.
I would bet that a lot of our listeners don't know much about Patty Hearst either, because that was sort of when I was a little kid, my parents were still talking about it, but that sort of faded over time, right? It really has.
Yeah, it's one of those things where she was kidnapped in 1974, so I was 7.
I was 1.
So it was one of those things where I was actually talking to a friend about this, is it's in the earliest parts of our being aware of stuff that was going on, outside of our family. So it was Watergate and Patty Hearst, and because we lived in Germany for some of that time, the Baader-Meinhof group and stuff, that's all the kind of things that as I got older, those things kind of stuck with me. But the actual story behind Patty Hearst is wild too.
Yeah.
But she did give us the Hall & Oates classic Rich Girl. She was the inspiration.
Really?
So thank you, Patty Hearst.
She's also the inspiration for a really weird Harlan Coben book that I really like.
We know you love those Harlan Coben made for Netflix series.
It's not even a guilty pleasure. It's just a pleasure, Laura, right? All right. So, Kevin, this is obviously Thursday's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening next week on Crime Writers On?
So on Monday, we're going to be talking about the comedy noir series from Apple TV Plus, Bad Monkey, starring Vince Vaughn.
All right.
I love that so much. Spoiler.
All right.
Oh, really? Is it good?
I couldn't stop watching it.
For Laura.
Well, wait till you hear Laura's review. Then you'll know.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, can I throw one other announcement out there for our listeners? Speaking of watching stuff. So the season finale of Only Murders in the Building is coming up, and we are going to do another live show review. Now, if we can get our Facebook connected properly, we will be live streaming on Facebook. For those of us on Patreon, we're going to be able to watch our review, and patrons will also be able to hang around for the after show. They'll be in the chat and stuff like that. So you're going to want to set your DVRs for Tuesday, October 29th. That's the season finale of Only Murders in the Building on Hulu. And then we are going to be going live on Wednesday, October 30th, 8 p.m. Be there.
So everybody can watch it on Facebook, on our page or the group, right? And then, but patrons can watch it with a separate link and stay for the after show.
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. Cool. They can come to the champagne room with us.
Come to the champagne room, yes.
Where everything that happens is the opposite of sexy.
Apparently so.
We are the least sexy champagne room in America.
Speak for yourself, Rebecca. I'm going to get an outfit ready for this event.
Okay. Very curious to see what you're going to wear to our champagne room.
All right.
Stay tuned.
All right. So, Kevin, we have something pretty hefty to talk about. So should we get to it?
Let's do it.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and drop that first clip right now. Leading off.
The way the police deal with the inconvenient people, the dangerous people who are fighting to make America a real democracy, that's the story that's been hidden in plain sight.
New York's police department says its mission is to protect and serve, but its long-forgotten origin story says something different. Before they carried weapons and wore uniforms, the city's loose affiliation of constables and watchmen hunted escaped enslaved people and made arrests for a fee.
To have this kind of like what many consider like a private uniformed force that was going to be armed and given the power to enforce laws of their own whims sounded very much like an invading army to people.
New York eventually formed a police force, one less focused on solving crime and more to serve the mayor's political interests. In the 150-plus years that followed, police reforms and counter-reforms shaped how the NYPD uses its authority. But the debate continues on how modern law enforcement interacts with the community.
The face of policing has changed a lot since 1845, but the nature of the work itself has not.
Which makes this hidden history an even more chilling preview of how the NYPD defines danger for the next 180 years.
From Wondery, Crooked Media, and PushBlack comes the podcast Empire City, the untold story of the NYPD. Peabody Award winner Chenjerai Kumanyika recounts the lost history of Gotham's police and brings his personal experiences as a second-generation police reform advocate. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Empire City, so if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. Now, Toby, this podcast didn't mean to be newsy and pegged to a news story, but it accidentally is, right?
Yeah, well, Eric Adams has been charged with a lot of crimes for which there appear to be quite a bit of evidence that he declined to just erase from his phone, for instance.
Because he forgot the code, Toby.
And he still hasn't given it up as of this
figure it out, yeah.
And there's like texts like, Mayor, please remember to delete all our communications about this. He's like, oh, I always do, but clearly didn't.
Except when I don't.
Everybody, yeah. Anyway, if people don't know, Eric Adams is a former police officer. He was a transit cop and then a New York City cop. And, he put himself out as sort of like a new Democrat in that he was sort of socially liberal, but also like really tough on crime and pro-police and stuff, sometimes to very hilarious effect.
I thank God every day that we have a cop that's the mayor of the city of New York that has went through the training that you have gone through and ready to serve this city in the manner that it should be served.
And the man thanking God that a cop is the mayor of New York City is a cop that's also mayor of New York City, Eric Adams.
Eric Adams, I think the podcast has a lot of restraint in not pointing out the many, many police-related lies that he's told in his time as mayor.
It's insane.
Such as, I carry a photo of my dead ex-partner in my wallet, and then when asked to show the photo, had someone on his staff create a fake photo that he could then show reporters.
And then pour coffee and tea on it to make it look old.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my.
He's quite the character. And I think the podcast treated him with some dignity here.
Yeah, we don't live in New York City, but this guy seemed like a dick to begin with.
He's pretty amazing.
Okay.
So Kevin, this podcast is a historical, telling, right? And we have listened to other podcasts sort of along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this has real fiasco and slow burn vibes. It's, well-told historical narrative punctuated by input from historical figures, but also really strong host. And what Chenjerai has that Leon Neyfakh doesn't, he has this really great first-person story to go along with the living history. Not only the fact that, we start the whole podcast off, learning about his father was this historical figure that he grew up not knowing. He often turns to his daughter to illustrate both, sort of the story and the larger concept of things. So he's giving us, the audience, a way into his personal experience. I don't ever feel like it's ever heavy-handed the way he does that. There's the two big scenes, right, with her. Was the one in the park where he asks her, what is it the police do? And this young, impressionable girl says, they protect us.
What do you think the police do? She puts down her sand shovel and her eyes dart back and forth, searching for the right answer.
They keep people safe.
I mean, that is what the police say their job is. But when I hear her say it, I start to panic.
And then we hear again her post-traumatic stress about what she saw in the Gaza protests. It's starting to get to her the impression of maybe the police aren't exactly what I've been told. I don't know if she's old enough to sort of get the nuance of that, but she certainly got the idea in that instance that was wrong. And so to take it through her lens, I think was an interesting way to do that without sort of putting your thumb on the scale about what way you're supposed to think, just, through the eyes of babes.
What do you think, Laura? Does it make a difference when the host of a story like this, makes such a personal connection to the story? And it's not just because Chenjerai is Black. It's because he actually, comes from a family that has worked in this field before. And it's, he does bring his daughter into the story. And, and he includes a scene where he was active at a protest in the story. So it's more of an active role.
Yeah, well, I think, going into this, we've talked about different types of podcasts that are journalistically more straightforward, and then this sort of more activism, we want to see change as a result of this podcast, and we are okay putting ourselves in it and putting our thoughts and our life in this podcast to help illustrate these points. And I think we get that, and we know that right from the beginning in this podcast. And I think it does set it up so that you're okay, this person has a personal connection. This person has had a lot of personal experiences. And like Kevin was saying, it starts off with the scene of hanging out with his 4-year-old daughter at the playground, and then segueing into his own story with his father and how that plays into the history of the NYPD as his own family has had these experiences. So in the old days of journalism, we didn't have a place for those type of reporting stories where, we have accurate historical reporting, we have journalism, but we also have the ability to put ourselves into the story. And I feel like that's changed. And I think a lot since podcasting, honestly, because I don't remember seeing it as much when I was still working as a print reporter.
Yeah, it's also changed since I think there's just been more conversation about the lack of diversity in journalism and sort of constructs of journalism and objectivity as being a default, white guy position that you can be objective because things don't typically affect you as much when you're a 60-year-old white dude, as they do when they affect other people. So, Toby, we've heard before, and something that a lot of people know is that police departments were formed to enforce slavery laws, to, catch runaway slaves and bring them back. This podcast teaches us something else, which is that New York City police people basically took free people and sold them into slavery. Is that a story that you were familiar with?
No, I wasn't familiar with that part of it. I mean, I've certainly read plenty about the origins of the ideas of police departments in the U.S. and how they were basically there to support the institution of slavery. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it surprised me that this was happening, but I think the incentives for the quote unquote police at this time were to move black bodies south where they could be used as slaves. So again, just because it's north of the Mason-Dixon doesn't mean there wasn't virulent racism and people didn't look at black people as being less than human in some cases. And it's kind of the original sin of police departments, right? It starts off like this. And then how does it change as things go forward? Sure, you're not sending people back to be slaves in the South anymore, but how do those origins infiltrate their way up through time to sort of inform what's going on these days? And he gets to some of that. I mean, one of the things about this podcast is basically sort of themed. They're connected by a theme, but any of these could be standalones, I think. I mean, I think you can drop in on any episode and not feel like you really needed to listen to the other ones to understand what's going on, which I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but it's a little bit different than a lot of the stuff that we do. But he does later, I think, get into sort of what the next stage of that is, where you go from sort of policing along racial lines to then policing among, socioeconomic or class lines 40, 50 years later.
Yeah, I mean, we all watched the documentary Power. It was great, but it was more like an academic view, maybe more like a think piece about the history of law enforcement across the U.S. And so that was a good primer for the historical record going into this podcast. But it focuses strictly on the NYPD. So I think it has a little more of a practical through line for the listener to sort of follow along. It makes it more of a conventional historical narrative podcast in that way, right? With the what do they call them? The kidnap squad or whatever they called the people who grabbed, freed black people and sent them back to the South. From there. And you realize that even though they had night watchmen and stuff, they weren't really solving crime or being law enforcement unless you wanted to pay them to go and make an arrest. Just like you could pay us to give you an exclusive podcast experience.
Just like that.
It's exactly like that.
Yes. What a smooth transition from this very serious topic to our business section when we sell you on joining our paid content on Patreon. We're so sorry to people who made this podcast who may not have listened to us before, but we always do this.
We always do this, yeah. Just as smooth, too. But if you join us at patreon.com/partners in crime media.
Yes.
We will not police what you're listening to.
Okay, Kevin, enough.
No, enough?
Enough.
Do not go any
Just
further?
Sell the stuff.
Okay, I will freeze.
Stop it.
All right. You get exclusive podcasts if you join us at one of these different levels. You can join us at the leading off level. You'll get these Crime Writers on After show. You can listen to Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club. Or you can also tune in to our Married with Podcast Advice podcast, or Rebecca's Readathon, where she brings us all the latest developments in the Karen Reed case. If you join us at the Bricker scale level, you get another exclusive podcast. That's Laura's Leave It to Bricker podcast. And then if you join us at the Let's Do What We Do level, you get episodes of Crime Writers on early and ad-free. And for those of us who come in at the Deep Divers level, you get to not only listen to Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast, you get to watch the live taping of it, and you can even, work in the chat, and we have people that jump in and they offer their own opinions on the book. So it's really great. It's a great way of supporting our podcast by joining us on Patreon. Another great way you can support the podcast is by shopping with our Amazon storefront. You can check out some of our favorite things, then do the rest of your shopping. That helps us because we earn commissions on qualified purchases. Rebecca, can you tell us what are this week's Crime Writers on Amazon recommendations?
All right, Kevin, I promise I will put the link to this on the story because I want everybody out there to have these who wants them.
What is it?
I have found the world's greatest leggings. The world's greatest leggings. They're called Satina leggings. They are incredible. You can get them in short. You can get them in long or long with pockets. They are the softest.
Oh yes, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Aren't they freaking
Super
awesome?
soft, yes.
They're the butteriest, softest, best leggings I have ever worn in my entire life, and they are like $18 for the most expensive ones.
And ladies, your husbands will not be able to keep their hands off your legs.
And they come in the best colors. They come in like charcoal gray. They come in olive green. They come in like this. They are freaking awesome. They're awesome. I'll put a link on our page.
And Toby Ball, what are your listener-inspired Toby Ball's deep cut recommendations?
This I feel like I may buy myself. It's the by design 6x4.6 in Pardon Our Weeds We Are Feeding the Bees yard sign with metal stake for garden, farm, decor, save the bees, pollinator, lawn sign stand.
So it's a sign you put outside your house. It says, hey, I know this place looks like crap, but it's on purpose because we're feeding the bees.
Right, or at least that's the story we're going with.
Okay, I like the story.
I may actually get one of those.
Get two.
Second, we've got the Jakey Fudd Deluxe Ironing Board with heat-resistant cover and thickened felt pad, heavy, sturdy legs. Maybe they could use some of those leggings. Full-size hanger iron, board foldable.
That's not what leggings do.
L-gray.
Heat resistance is an important aspect of the ironing board.
Yes, if the flammable ironing boards are frowned upon. It's also gray. They spell it in the British fashion. So I don't know if...
Grey.
Grey. So I don't know.
You're supposed to iron from the other side.
Yeah, you might need the another one that's on this list. It's a European travel plug adapter. So perhaps if you're getting that from Britain, you might want to throw that on top.
Those are some fantastic.
It's not just British, it's also regional. I grew up learning that Grey was spelled Grey on Long Island, just FYI.
I know we're far afield here, but I got in trouble with Mrs. Boyle, my sophomore English teacher, because I spelled something Grey. She marked it wrong. I came in with a dictionary to show that it was an alternate spelling, and I got yelled at, and that was the end of that.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
What a witch.
Were you still at Catholic school?
I was Catholic school. Yeah, there's a Mrs.
They
Boyle.
whipped you. They beat your knuckles.
No. But
What a witch.
I just was like, it doesn't pay to fight City Hall. Apparently.
What would have happened if you put Grey on the Regents exam? Do you think, Rebecca? Would we gotten credit for that?
I don't know, but that was how I learned to spell it when I was in school. So, just saying.
Oh, remember you can shop us first at Amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. That's all you got to do.
All right, Kevin, before we end the business section, I have a really important question for you.
Ask it.
Do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Jessica Palmer and Jessica McAbey. Bless you.
Jessica and Jessica.
I got so many Jessicas.
Do you see what we do there?
If your name's Jessica, you're on Patreon. I went past your name today. Jessica Palmer, Jessica McAbey, just congratulations. You won the Jessica lottery.
Yeah.
We love all of our Jessicas.
Yeah, we have a lot of Jessicas. But see what we do, Kevin? People join our Patreon and then they might hear their name on our podcast.
Yep.
It's a powerful incentive to support us, is it not?
It is.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and fade that music up.
Can I just urge people to sign up for our Facebook, our official Facebook listener group? What is it you call it?
Yes.
You usually do this. I was worried that you missed out on this.
Facebook discussion group, yes.
It's wonderful. It's the best one on Facebook. The moderators do an excellent job. We try.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Try not to be a jerk, and Rebecca won't kick you out. And all you have to do, literally, the only thing you have to know to get into our group is if you can name one of us, Toby, Laura, Rebecca, or Kevin. And sometimes, even if you say it's a 4-way tie, if I feel as though you know our names, sometimes you get in anyway. At least you know there's 4 of us, although maybe that's in the question.
Yes. Yep.
I don't know. Anyway, so please, for the love of God, join that. And then also the newsletter is the other thing.
Yes.
People
sign up for our
love
free
the newsletter. Just do everybody a favor.
This is amazing.
And if you get in the Brichter Scale level, you can get into the Brichter Scale secret Facebook group where I do rage walking.
I let other people in who aren't paying for that,
Yeah.
Laura. I hate to break it to you.
What?
I don't care. If they want to join and talk to you, come on, we'll let them.
So all my efforts to make this a concise business section have just gone.
Well, I was just worried we were dropping the ball on those last 2 things, so I felt like I had to jump in.
I don't want to drop the ball in any
I know.
of that.
I caught a Twitter troll trying to get into our Facebook group, and I did not let them in. All right,
dude. All right. Thus ends.
Does thus end the business section?
Thus ends the business section.
Thus ends the business section.
Now streaming on Paramount Plus.
I came here
to make something of myself.
You want your name up in big, flashy lights.
Before Rosemary's Baby,
I chose you.
evil was born.
They did something to me.
Starring Julia Garner.
I need to know what's happening.
And Diane Wiest.
This is a role that you were born to play. Baby's here to stay.
Apartment 7A, now streaming on Paramount Plus, or buy it on digital. Rated R.
So, Kevin, who's our next sponsor right now?
We're sponsored by Quince.
Oh, boy.
So we are kind of officially out of summer. We're into autumn. And now it's time to switch things up, move into a new season. And I think, we got to look right past Halloween. You got to start thinking about Thanksgiving and Christmas and cooler, crisper weather.
Yeah.
And that means you got to get your cashmere sweater from Quince, priced from $50.
Yes.
And Rebecca, have you been keeping them afloat with all of your sweaters you've been buying from Quince?
I've got a couple bookmarked right now, Kevin. Right now, my favorite is this very cute kind of cropped, sort of quasi off the shoulder one.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in a color called I think it's called strawberry cream. It also comes in a color called moss. And what's held me back, the only thing that's held me back is it wasn't the price, was which one to get. I love Quince so much. The quality of their cashmere for the price is incredible.
Well, I was going to say that, if you could just get all of them, maybe you should.
Well, thanks.
I'm thinking twice about that right now, actually. So, switching seasons is a breeze with Quince's high-quality closet essentials.
Just go to quince.com/crime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns.
Mm-hmm.
That's QUINCE.com/crime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/crime.
At the UPS Store, we know being a small business owner means holiday time is still go time. Still get those orders shipped time. And still re-up on stamps and supplies time. That's why this upcoming holiday, while others close up shop, we'll be open. And happy to help you keep being unstoppable. Come into your local store today. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Be unstoppable.
Lemon, lime, and a drop of cherry make a simple Shirley. But what happens when Tito's handmade vodka reveals this sweet sipper's dirty secret? Stir up a Tito's Dirty Sherlock and crack the case with Tito's at Tito'sVodka.com. 40% alcohol by volume, namely 80 proof, crafted to be savored responsibly.
So, Laura, we had a very interesting scene in the podcast, a whole section where Chenjerai tries to find out what the hell the New York City Police Department was doing when they set up a museum.
Oh, that was bizarre.
What was in the museum? What was the point of the museum? And couldn't find out what was in the museum. That's weird because museums typically have curators. They typically have records. Yeah. Not that hard to find out. Even at a closed museum, usually there's photos or archives. What was there? Not this time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this was super weird. I'm listening to this. I'm like, okay, so they get the number for the person who is the former police commissioner who started the museum. Calls. They're like, hi, I'm looking for Mr. So-and-so. And they're like, who are you? Want to talk about the museum? Oh, he's not here. And then the next thing you know, apparently that guy's wife goes behind the scenes and makes some secret squirrel phone calls. And then they get a call from some guy who's like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm the one that they brought on to help get this museum up and going. But here's the weird thing. The museum was run by police, not curators. It was run by NYPD. So this guy starts writing up his little plan to tell the truth about the history. And it's never sees the light of day because, the police that are overseeing the museum edit it.
They wanted me to write about the New York City Police Department, but without using the words violence or corruption, which is effectively impossible.
They were serious about this. So serious that the museum's director, an active NYPD sergeant, would personally edit Ed O'Donnell's work.
And then, wait for it, the guy that edited we don't want the word corruption ends up in a corruption scandal because he's, wait for it, using the museum to accept gifts of luxury cars and office space. So This museum, like, I don't even know what the point of it was because
I think it seems fairly clear from your description.
Well, I know, but I mean, like, the fact that it just like went belly up, I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I would like a Laura Bricker museum, please.
It was a propaganda operation through which a guy took gifts.
The Museum of High Irony, and
it does feel like a performance art piece.
But if you're from New York, there's there are just so many museums for different things. There's like a museum dedicated to tenements and things like that. So like a police museum doesn't seem like a crazy idea for a city like New York. But like you said, the fact that the curriculum around this museum was, set to eliminate sort of any reference to brutality or corruption or anything like that. I mean, if it wasn't envisioned as just a money-making racket for a few people, it certainly was envisioned more as a celebration of the department as opposed to a repository of anything of historical accuracy or contextualization. So the only way that Chenjerai is able to sort of like get good material is to talk to historians that don't specialize in the NYPD, but they specialize in other things like different eras or different social movements or whatever, things that where this police department intersects. But it seems like that if you want to do your PhD in the history of the New York Police Department, you're not going to get a lot of help from the New York Police Department unless it's about, all the sunshine and happiness and all the dubs.
I felt like this police museum could be in Canton, Massachusetts, is what I felt like. They would open that today. There's very
few organizations that run their own museums about themselves that are warts and all. Like, I can't imagine going to like an army museum and seeing an exhibit about My Lai, or going to the Baseball Hall of Fame and having a big thing about Pete Rose or
steroids.
Whatever, or steroids. I mean, it's just not the way institutions work. You're not going to like drag yourself. I mean, that's why you have to have private museums that aren't associated with it to like tell the actual story.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I highly recommend if anyone is interested and they visit New York. The Tenement Museum is a freaking awesome museum. Awesome museum. So, Toby, one of the stories that we get in the podcast is a story I didn't know. There was a period of time where New York abolished the NYPD and instituted a second police department. And these two police departments were like the Jets and the Sharks and went to war with one another.
When you're a cop all the way. Yeah, right.
That they would like arrest each other. They would arrest people and the other police department would set the people free. What did you think about that? Because that was a very surprising piece of history to me.
That was wild. I think that was my favorite episode of this series. There's a mayor who's sort of a scalawag named Fernando Wood, who turns the NYPD into sort of his own personal army or his own sort of personal police force. And, the state legislature decides they want to put the kibosh on that. And so they sort of officially end the New York Police Department and start the Metropolitan Police Department, which is run by the legislature, and they send them down. But of course, you can say something doesn't exist anymore, but the people are still there and the institution's still there. So you've got two different forces and they're getting in each other's way. There's disputes over who's making arrests. They arrest each other. As Rebecca was saying, it's sort of like this gang war, except all the gangs are cops. And then the big sort of climactic moment is when there's this insane brawl on the steps of City Hall with people just getting really, really hurt. It sounds like.
Imagine being arrested by the state metropolitans one night, and then the next night, Woods Municipal show up and set you free. Or even wilder, imagine police from these competing forces fighting over who gets to arrest you. And then they just arrest each other. It was chaos.
I mean, I can't believe, that this is the first time I've heard about it, that they didn't cover it in 7th grade social studies when I was growing up in Syracuse.
It wasn't in the NYPD museum. That's why.
I mean, we had to learn a lot about Tammany Hall, but we did not learn anything about this. Yeah, and I can't believe there's not like a show or something about it. I mean, it just seems too good to be true.
Yeah.
So, Laura, the United States is basically built on a history of voter disenfranchisement. It's just true. For a long time, you had to be white and own property to be able to vote, and a man. And then you had to be a man and own property. And in New York, you could own property if you were black. And there was this village called Seneca Village that was then taken by eminent domain to build Central Park, the crown jewel of Manhattan now, as it's seen, this like $14 million project in the 1800s, which is a tremendous amount of money. And this is sort of like the frequently untold story of Central Park, right? And this is also the playground where we hear Chenjerai and his daughter hanging out, right? Where Seneca Village used to be. What were your thoughts about this story?
I didn't know this story. I thought this could have been like a standalone story. You know, it's basically this free black settlement that was founded in the 1820s. And they were, like you said, allowed to own property. And, you know, they had like a whole community there. They had schools and gardens and their homes. And it was kind of like, this is what we have, and this is what we're able to have here. You hear about when they come in with this plan they want to increase the property value in that area, and they want to build this park. And so they're going to get rid of this. They seize these homes, and people are ordered to leave. But then there's a group that like refuse to leave and stay. And I think that was the part, you know, you're like, wow, what would you do if you were in that situation? But they're like, we're not leaving. And there's this irony, you know, you have this army, like the white police officers going through, and they just destroy this, and they destroy the people. And there's no real record of this, except where they are out on this playground is like basically where there's kind of like a graveyard, or like where these people that stayed were killed.
Yeah, it's not unlike the Tulsa Race Massacre in many ways. That's sort of the story that I kept thinking of when I was hearing about it. Yeah.
So I was just like, wow, how do I not know about this? But also, wow, that particular section was pretty intense.
So, Kevin, we can't talk about this podcast without talking about this guy, Comstock. Mr. Purity.
Santorum 150 years earlier.
And his legacy of, you know, not only how he influenced the police, but also how he influenced women's bodily autonomy and rights in New York. You think he's weird?
These guys are just weird. Yeah. I mean, this is a weird dude, but doesn't mean he wasn't dangerous. And because his legacy still lingers today. And like, this was a guy who comes in and he's just so motivated by not wanting to masturbate that he's going to turn like all the, you know, puritanical, and I'm just gonna go into New York and just take notes of all what happens in all the brothels and whatever. And then he gets involved with the YMCA, which now it just seems like they were like the Heritage Foundation of their time. I don't know. Like when you think of the YMCA, you think of the swimming pools and the the daycare centers, and it's like, yeah, that's not where these guys came from.
So he's constantly recording how many pounds of pornographic books he's burned, how many photographs, how many dildos he's sent to the incinerator in New Jersey. And all of this is listed. And I feel like, who are these account books for? And I thought, you know, they're really kind of for God.
And then you've got like Madame Roustel, who is like this, I would say, local businesswoman who made a lot of money.
So rich.
By, you know, offering, I don't want to say potions. They don't like really go too much into detail. Yeah, abortion services, where it was more like she wasn't doing surgical abortions.
She was.
She was.
And
oh,
she's
okay.
Abortion medication and surgical abortions.
Doing stuff like it's funny that it ends up being sort of this was one of the things that he was able to crack down on, because the lingering effect of the Comstock Act from 18 whatever the bumfuck it is still on the books, and this seems to be like the instrument through which we're going to have abortion pills and other educational materials banned from the mail because like we thought like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about this anymore. And we misjudged that. This is important because this is where police become involved in vice. In addition to murder and crime and property crime and maintaining order, now police are in charge of enforcing morality laws and vice enterprises. So it just, again, another example of how the responsibility and the power of police departments, particularly in New York, started to expand. The creep, mission creep.
It's where police become in charge of women's bodily autonomy and take down like this incredibly successful, wealthy, and potentially murder her. It's also maybe
that was a great side thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Laura, do you think this guy enjoyed weighing dildos and pornographic books? Because apparently he was obsessed not just with collecting dildos and pornography, but with weighing, and being able to measure how many pounds of dildos and pornography he was able to collect.
I mean, I guess my question would be, was he then weighing actual penises to see if they were the same weight? Was he actually doing any, like, what else was he doing with this information? I have some serious, look at Toby's face. I have some questions.
Got some answers I don't want to get into on the show.
I just feel like anytime you hear something like this, you're like, okay, this is like one of those people who's secretly enjoying this. And
you think?
Yeah.
Of course.
But that's why I'm like, he's like, excuse me, could you whip that thing out so I could do a comparison?
I just want to know who's in the control group for this experiment.
No, he's clearly like the guy just wants to masturbate all the time, and this is like his outlet is like, all right, I'm gonna fucking keep anybody else from doing it.
Yeah. He couldn't become the governor of North Carolina, so he did this instead.
Oh, ouch. Oh, wow.
You can't be governor, you could be a dildo wearer. I mean, that's a step down.
Do you think the ones made out of oak were heavier than the ones made out of
They said it rubber. They said they were made out of rubber.
Rubber?
Yeah.
Oh, you want a little flexibility? That's fine. No, not going to yuck anyone's yum, but really, it's like if you're going to be that kind of hypocritical, then
yeah.
Shove that up your ass.
It's really incredible to look back at a time, and obviously the 1800s sucked in many, many, many ways. Clearly.
Can't even keep a dildo and someone wanted to weigh it.
In New York in the 1800s, but like abortion services
I need a new dildo scale.
Freely available if you had the money. And as we hear the historians say, abortion has been part of every culture in the history of humankind. And, love and practice of sex included fun stuff until the advent of these institutions that were meant to keep people from doing things that were basic freedoms, right? I mean, it's just like, it's really unbelievable. Whose idea was all this anyway?
That guy Comstock.
So, Toby, what did you know? You mentioned Tammany Hall earlier. Tell me a little bit about Tammany Hall, what you knew about it before you listened to this podcast.
Oh, Jesus. We're going back to 7th grade social studies. I assume you had to do the same thing. I thought it was a statewide curriculum.
Probably for your state.
Tammany Hall. I mean, I think he mentions it's like this sort of long running group that controlled City Hall. And Thomas Nast, the famous political cartoonist, like sort of the beginning of political cartoons was for him to be able to communicate to immigrants who did not speak English about the corruption of Tammany Hall to try and get them to vote out. Boss Tweed was the guy at the time. So anyway, it's just another story of corruption in New York, and long-lasting corruption in this case, and sort of the attempts to fight it. Again, these are like things that I just assume everybody in the country has learned, but I think it's just us in New York State, like the triangle shirtwaist fire and
they
stuff.
didn't teach that. Vermont didn't teach that.
Well, how can you consider yourself an educated person if you don't know about the triangle waistcoats factory?
You don't know about weighing dildos.
That's why doors in public places open out, because all these people, there's a fire and people ran to the door and they got pushed up against the door, so it opened in, so they couldn't open it. They couldn't open the door because of the panic, and all these people burned to death.
Laura, there's also a media story in this podcast and how the media sort of influenced the development of the police. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so this was the guy from the New York Herald, and he's basically kind of like super well known. And you think about like papers today that are wielding power and everything, but at that point, politicians weren't speaking directly through TV or whatever, but this guy had access to the politicians. So he was like basically able to get comments and also kind of set a bit of his political agenda, a lot. And so when they have the woman who was murdered and he starts kind of putting his own things out, it's like the Fox News of the day, basically, where he's going on with his own theories about what happened. He's saying that the woman was actually murdered by, Black people. And then you find out that he's just using like horrible language in his newspaper. He's using the N-word. He's using a lot of things that, you wouldn't think would be okay to be out there. But you see the reach that this paper had at the time and the way that he is able to influence the narrative and the way that he's able to influence the information. And it's just like, I always like hearing the media stories of someone that worked in the media, but it's also sort of a cautionary tale of be careful when you have that position to use it wisely. And this guy did not.
Well, they reminded me a lot of, Donald Trump buying those full page ads in the newspapers calling for the death penalty. And really just reinforcing the false narrative that these 5 young black men and black boys committed the crime. Clearly, they've been exonerated, and that's not true. And, his ability to infiltrate the media with money by this ad shaped public opinion for years and years and years. And to me, there was a very direct tie there that, again, the podcast showed a lot of restraint in not making, but it's certainly something I thought about.
Now streaming on Paramount Plus.
I came here to make something of myself.
You want your name up in big, flashy lights.
Before Rosemary's Baby,
I chose you.
evil was born.
They did something to me.
Starring Julia Garner
I need to know what's happening.
and Diane Wiest.
This is a role that you were born to play. Baby's here to stay.
Apartment 7A, now streaming on Paramount Plus or buy it on digital. Rated R.
At the UPS Store, we know being a small business owner means holiday time is still go time. Still get those orders shipped time. And still re-up on stamps and supplies time. That's why this upcoming holiday, while others close up shop, we'll be open. And happy to help you keep being unstoppable. Come into your local store today. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Be unstoppable.
Lemon, lime, and a drop of cherry make a simple Shirley. But what happens when Tito's handmade vodka reveals this sweet sipper's dirty secret? Stir up a Tito's Dirty Sherlock and crack the case with Tito's at Tito'sVodka.com. 40% alcohol by volume, namely 80 proof, crafted to be savored responsibly.
Looking for toys that'll get the biggest reactions?
Yes, please.
Walmart has jaw-dropping toys like For Real Daisy Yoga Goat,
Awesome!
Razor Crazy Cart Shuffle,
Whoa!
Hot Wheels, Bluey 3-in-1 Airplane Playset, and more. Aren't you gonna say cool?
I'm saving it for the holidays.
Smart. Welcome to your Walmart.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out the podcast, Empire City, the Untold Origin Story of the NYPD. I'm going to switch up the order today. Toby Ball, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
I don't know what to think because Laura hasn't gone yet. I liked it. It's interesting as having made like kind of a history podcast recently. He sets out a difficult thing just in the way podcasts tend to be formed and what the elements are, and that it's all happening so long ago that there's not a whole lot of soundbitey stuff. You obviously can't interview anybody who's there at the time. He's got some interesting interviews. We didn't talk about the main review, but he has a interview with a descendant of this cop named Clubber Williams while they're taking a look at Clubber's brass knuckles, which was quite something. So it's kind of interesting in that some of these elements that we're used to in podcasts that we listen to aren't there. He doesn't do very much sort of quoting from sources at the time either. It's mostly just sort of telling the story. All that being said, the story is really compelling. I'll be interested to listen to some more of it to kind of see how it continues and kind of how it winds up and sort of what conclusions he draws and stuff. But I think sort of understanding sort of the origins of the police department and then how, different factors and pressures and personality. And I think also just, the changing nature of society kind of affects the police department as years go by. But there are certain things that kind of feel like they remain the same. And, I won't go into it at this spoiler-free section, but I think that's the thread that kind of holds everything together, right? Is you're seeing these certain kinds of changes, and then you're seeing these sort of essential ingredients that are unchanging. And I think it does it really, really effectively. I thought it was super interesting to listen to. And I think, for some people, it may take a second to sort of get past sort of the usual way in which these kinds of stories have been told, mostly because we listen to things that are more modern. But yeah, I'm like definitely a solid thumbs up.
Laura Bricker, thumbs up or thumbs down for Empire City?
I'm a mild thumbs up. And I think for me, it was pretty dense. And I am used to hearing like a little bit more traditional storytelling. I think what I liked about this, there was a lot of history I didn't know. I thought it was really interesting to go back and hear about what was happening in New York City when the police were evolving. I'm hearing things that I think interesting parts of history that we should know about. And the host is able to relate this to his own personal experience and his own family's experience. And so I think the only thing for me, the reason I'm not like a huge thumbs up is just that it was pretty dense in just the amount of material that you were digesting listening to this.
Kevin, I'm going to give you the last word, so I'm going to go now, okay?
All right.
I give this a thumbs up, too. I think it is dense, but I actually liked that. And I really like the format of this podcast, how each episode was a standalone and that you could, stop. You could go and listen to the next one like a day later and you're getting a whole new story. I really liked that experience of listening to this podcast. And, speaking to what you just said, Laura, we've heard a lot about the fact that, the police were invented to enforce laws of enslavement. And what we hear here, the New York City cops in particular were kidnapping people and selling them. And there is a direct through line there to the mass incarceration of Black people. I mean, there's a direct through line there. And I really think this story is incredibly important, incredibly interesting. Corruption is the engine powering New York City right now. And I think for a long time. And that's something we're seeing play out in real time. So I think it's a great time to listen to this podcast. It's very timely. It's very newsy in ways that I'm not 100% sure these folks intended it to be when they first conceived of it and put it together. But yeah, I'm enjoying listening to it. And I look forward to the next episodes that are coming out, especially given the cliffhanger at the end of the last episode that I listened to. Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm going to go thumbs up on this. I enjoy a good historical podcast. I certainly hope that Chenjerai has collected 18 pages of shocking photos because this is going to make a really great hardcover book as well. I think that as far as a historical telling, this is fair. He gets all the important points across, but I really find Chenjerai to be an intriguing character here, though he hasn't made himself one. Talks about his family. I'm really interested in him now. Maybe it's because he hasn't really talked about his, some of his perceptions, but I hadn't really talked enough about himself to like really sort of satisfy my curiosity about him.
He drops nuggets.
He drops nuggets. And I'm like, I think I'd like to go for a beer with this dude.
I have questions. Yeah,
I don't hang out with a lot of PhDs, but when I do, I like to shoot the shit, and I think he'd be a good guy to shoot the show with. It's a really interesting podcast. I didn't think I wanted to know how many metric tons of dildos were seized in New York City in the 1800s, but these are the little things that keep podcast listeners coming back. I think it's a great podcast. I think that next time I talk to Leon Neyfakh, he says, you got to listen to this one. This is a great historical podcast, and you'll learn something as well.
All right, that's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We do. And this cat comes to us from Ottawa, Caroline, one of my Instagram followers who has sent me other cat suggestions before. Carol Kitty Foster from Ottawa, Ontario, chronicles the adventures of foster cats. But this is not one of her cats.
Oh.
So this is a cat that literally made an 800-mile journey home after getting lost in Yellowstone National Park.
Oh, yeah.
The 2-year-old cat named Rainbow, but spelled Raynebeau, 2 words.
That's a tragedy.
Ran off into the woods at the Fishing Bridge RV park during a family trip to the park. The owners spent most of their vacation looking for him, spending hours searching in the woods. They clearly needed a cat detective, which they did not have. I would have been happy to go to Yellowstone. And it was a devastating moment when they had to leave, thinking they were abandoning their beloved pet. 3 months later, out of the blue, the family received a call from the Placer Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals stating their cat had been found in Roseville, California. They tracked the cat through the chip. This is why you should always chip your pets, people. They drove up for the tearful reunion with Rainbow, who was a little worse for the wear. His paws were dried and cracked, and he was malnourished, and he lost about half of his body weight, but he was alive. So we have no idea where this cat went during his adventure, but it's pretty cool, and I think it's interesting just to say, don't give up if your pet goes missing. They didn't necessarily enter the food chain. they might just be out having a big adventure. So thank you for sending that in, Caroline.
Given the animals...
Or maybe you'd kidnap them and we're keeping them in your house because you didn't recognize them.
I might be kidnapping them.
Given the animals that are roaming around Yellowstone, it is incredible that
It's amazing. It's amazing. So
and given the fact that you can walk around there and fall through the crust and die at any moment,
yes,
it's also pretty incredible that that survived. All right, Laura Bricker, of course.
Use 6 of its 9 lives.
Yeah, folks can email us at crimewriterson@gmail.com with their animal submissions for Cat of the Week. But how can they reach you online if they want to tap you on social media?
They can find me at Laura Bricker on Twitter and Instagram.
Toby Vaughn, what about you? How can you be found online if folks have questions about Rip Current or want to give you feedback about your excellent podcast?
Toyball NH on Twitter and TikTok and at Toyball603 on the Instagram.
What about you, Kevin? How can you be found?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
If you want to follow me everywhere, I'm Reb Lavoie. If you want to know how to find us on Facebook, go back to the business section. Toby does an excellent job selling it there. Get everything we make on Patreon, including the Crime Writers On After Show, which you can listen to anytime, and all the other stuff at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia. Our theme song was composed and performed by Tyler Gibbons. Our editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this show is sitting next to me, and his name is Kevin Flynn. This show is recorded in Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also use federal regulations to keep dildos out of the mall. Oh. Sorry, Spencers.
No, that's the mail.
Out of the mail. On behalf of all the crime writers.
Sorry, Spencers.
Thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. Boy, I can't read.
You know, there's a no effort to rebrand malls. I saw this commercial on something that I was watching, and it was all about going to the mall, and they had this they're trying to make the mall cool to hang out in again. And I'm like, is there even anything still at the mall? I don't know.
I haven't been to Foxtrot Mall in a couple of years, but last time I went there, it was all the the food court was these mom and pop. I mean, it wasn't Sparrow
the off-brand.
All this stuff. I mean, it was just there was a Jamaican food place right next to a Jamaican convenience store.
I haven't been. I've got to go to the mall this Sunday, so I have to go to Macy's. Occasionally I go there I need a dress for a wedding that I'm going to.
I buy dresses on Amazon when I need a dress for a wedding.
Well, I don't have my body shape at this age in life needs to try on the dress, and I can't deal with all the exchanges.
Yeah.
So
okay.
All right.
I'll check out the Jamaican food stand when I'm there too.
If it's still there.
Well, it is. I got this invitation.
Can we do the after show, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
This isn't the after show right now?
We can put this in the after show.
In crime media.
Lemon, lime, and a drop of cherry make a simple Shirley. But what happens when Tito's handmade vodka reveals this sweet sipper's dirty secret? Stir up a Tito's Dirty Sherlock and crack the case with Tito's at Tito'sVodka.com. 40% alcohol by volume, namely 80 proof, crafted to be savored responsibly.